Ron's ready to start. If everyone just take a seat, please. Hello, that's better. Thank you. Thanks to our crew chief. I'd like to welcome everybody out tonight to our storytelling. I'd like to thank Joe, Janice, and all those involved in setting up tonight. My name is John. I volunteer with the museum doing some social media, and I'm a bit of a Facebook buff. Our speaker tonight is going to be Ron MacDonald, who is a well-known author, journalist, historian, and a generally round good man. I'll turn the time over now to Ron. When Ron is done speaking, we'll open up the time for some questions for Ron, and then when that's over with, if anyone would like to come up and share a story, the time will be yours. And we still have some more refreshments in the back. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. It's a pleasure to see so many out here again. I want to pay a bit of thanks to the missionary work done by Cyril and Lorraine Aker, who started the storytelling in Sydney Mine some years ago. It was most enjoyable, and I'm glad that we're able to bring this back. And again, I reiterate what John said, that thanks to President Joe and Janice, and who've done organizing for every incident that we've had, everything scheduled by the Historical Society, and it's greatly appreciated. I want to talk more or less tonight on growing up in North Sydney during World War II, and we were a part of the war effort. And I'm afraid at times that this is slipping away from us, and we don't remember just what happened and the part that North Sydney played in World War II. And when we were a home port for convoys, we had a passageway to the steel plant in Sydney. We had coal that we serviced the ships that were coming in, and we had an air force here of 6 Catalina planes that looked out for submarines. We had a gate across the harbor to keep out any stray submarines that got by the planes. Anyway, I just want to be general tonight, and those of you who have specific things you want to raise, please wait till afterwards and we'll get at them then. You must remember that living in Cape Breton is like wearing a very good shoe but having a stone permanently embedded in it. This we accept, though not with some latter-day afflictions such as health and education delivery. But what I want to talk about this evening in storytelling is that North Sydney, indeed all the North Side, was an excellent place to be a boy, especially in the 1940s. I recall hearing of a Presbyterian minister saying grace at a Burns Day supper, thanking the Almighty for the Strait of Canso that kept out all the sins and degradations of the mainland. Well, we all know that a few of those sins crept across the Canso Strait, well before the causeway was opened even. It was inevitable, but to a small boy growing up in North Sydney, such sins could not stand the puritanical presence of the churches. My father often said that the church and the strong community clubs served their communities as well as the police departments. That was the way of life at the end of the 1930s. My father was a great baseball fan, and one of his exercises, which involved exercising, was to walk from North Sydney to Brown Street Park every Saturday that the Sydney Mines Ramblers were playing. It took quite a while, and even as a boy of 5 and 6 years old, I tagged along on these walks. He was also on a board together with Dr. Tom McCall. That's Dr. Tom McCall Sr., the grandfather of the present doctor here. And they were interviewing players who were going to be Ramblers in the coming year. Most of these players were Americans, and when we shut down in 1940, they had to find other businesses. There was one player came in, a fellow called Cowboy Moulton, who was a pitcher. And he was asked by my father or Dr. McColl, either one. And he said how he liked coming to Sydney Mines. And then the person added, you know, our center fielder is kind of slow. The second baseman can't hit, and the first baseman makes a lot of errors. the Cowboy Moulton looked at my father and said, have you got a catcher? That was it. Baseball came to a close in 1940, of course, here, when most of the local boys who still played joined up, and the Americans would not cross into a foreign country that was at war. One of my first memories of North Sydney and walking downtown was the horse trough. It was a round receptacle across from Thompson and Sutherland's big hardware store on the main street. It was meant for horses, and there was lots of horse traffic. You just had to look at the roads to discover that. But it was frequented by small boys as well, and myself included, which on a hot summer day liked to sip from the old run that housed the flow of clear water from Pottles Lake. That was a treat, nearly as good as a popsicle from Dave Ballas. No one paid attention to the purity of the water, as this was before chemicals that later took a lot of the taste from our water. We had a wonderful waterfront. 3 fish plants, Leonard, Nickerson's, and Swire's. So the latter was manned by President Ed Swires, who became the head of the North Sydney Victorious, or the Northside Victorious, and that was a drain on the finances, not only of Ed's personal finances, but of the company as well. The staff of the fish plants in North Sydney were mostly Newfoundlanders who came to North Sydney, PS, that's a pretty small one. Usually they came from the southwest coast of Newfoundland, and many of their families still survive in North Sydney and are an essential part of the community, especially its churches. In 1939, in late summer, Captain Angus Walters brought the Blue Nose to North Sydney. It was hired out for people to vote and have a trip on the Blue Nose, which my father took several of us in the family and went along with it. I was rather disappointed when I saw Captain Walters and told my father he didn't have a captain's cap. And my father said he doesn't need it. But we had other boats around as well. When the Blue Nose came in, that was just a day or two before war broke out in World War II. And then we had the Newfoundland Wharf, which we had the Caribou, of course, for a couple of years yet. The Burjo and the beautiful Bacalo, which I don't know how many of you might remember. It was a gorgeous ship. With the Northern Ranger, these were the ferries that came here. And the cargo steamers, Kyle and Random, and the seal fishery they went to in the spring when the ice blocked the harbor here too. And when the ice blocked the harbor, the Newfoundland ferries had to go to Louisburg, which was ice-free. We also had a ferry to Sydney, the Pawnee. And it was worth $0.05 for to go across on it. And it would dock just below where the old Royal Yacht Club was. And you climbed up a set of steps and you were 1 block from Charlotte Street, which was the shopping center of the universe at that time. I remember the Metropolitan had hot donuts in Greece, and what a gorgeous and glorious smell it was. We couldn't afford any, because our change had to be taken up to purchase gifts for those in the family who were unfortunate enough not to take that sea trip. Any little trip that any of the family took, we had to bring back something as a commemorative of being there, and it was expected. We skated on the harbor in the winter, and often to the other shore. There were horse races on the harbor. There were car races. And we had beautiful ice boats that went up and down, were quite dangerous, but very, very fast. There was Kelly's, which supplied food to the ships in the harbor, especially the convoys. And Salters, which brought Pottles Lake water to the convoys. They also serviced 30 to 50 schooners, which made North Sydney their victualizing port. Many of them, of course, from Newfoundland. Plus, of course, there were ships taking on bunker coal for trips with steel products from Sydney, rails and the finished material from the rail and wire mills at the steel plant. And we had leg boats, which were carrying oil up to Sydney. And here, where the big holder, the big tank was just a few yards from here down in close to Kelly's. Kelly's did have a traffic, especially during the convoys. It was a tremendous sales thing, and they rented all the lands north of the rail line, which was behind the Kelly's house, and grew vegetables there, which they supplied to the convoys at the time. They also had these big horses that there were crosses between Percherons, Belgians, perhaps even some Clydesdale in them. But they were very beautiful animals, and the men who drove them took great pride in running them up and down the front street with loads of vegetables, or to go to the takeoff point and be shipped out to the convoys. I remember Harold Warner was one of the drivers, and he would be standing sideways and looking at the crowd and driving the horse with one hand. Or the horses, really. We also had horses running on the racetrack at the time. And Ernie and Joel, remember, that we were able to get away from Ambrose Conway and get under the fence at the same time. And we had the steel, or the coal pier, of course. And there were ships there automatically, some lined up, especially when the convoys were taking on bunker coal. And I can remember in later years, Billy Long saying what a treat it was to be able to go trimming coal and working in the bunkers of the ships. The convoys were here in 1940 and 41, and most of 1942, before they were sent to the bigger assembly base in Halifax. We had 20 to 50 ships often were being organized for convoys. It was a slow convoy. There was no crews permitted ashore, same as in Iceland. The old saying of loose lips sink ships was pasted everywhere. Kelly's trips out with provisions on their bumboats, as they were called, and I can remember going out with my father and on these ships to visit all the convoys. The ships when they were taking on groceries, and Captain Bungay, who lived up in Pierce and Pettit, was the main captain of the fleet that took out groceries to these ships. We had a small red canoe in our family. It was a small red rowing boat, really. And we'd all learned to row before we started school, all 4 girls older than myself, and myself included. And we learned to row by ourselves, much to our neighbors' alarm and our father's delight. We swam 2 in the harbor, and we said we didn't mind the floaters. But to get on the water at any time, we had to, during the war, we had to have a permit for our rowboat. We couldn't go within a couple of 100 yards of any of the convoy ships. Also, the crews of who stayed on the ships, they were mostly mid-European who'd escaped the Nazis. At one point, we had several fishing boats arrive here from Norway, and they were filled with families and kids. And when the Catalina would go over, the kids would head for the rails and hang over the sides. That was really brought home just the dangers that were facing even the smallest of the citizens of other countries. They subsequently were moved down to Lunenburg County, where there was other and Halifax, where there were more Norwegian people. We had characters. There was Phoebe Boo, Jack Fraser, who played the bass drum in the town band, Joe Clunk, Dean McEwen, who sang "If I Had the Wings of an Angel" when he got drunk on Saturday. And that was payday for the workers. I remember in Thomas's fish plant, which was just across from where the quality store was, Joe would go in there Saturday afternoon. He would be all dressed up in a suit and shirt and tie and everything. And the fellas would hand him a paper for him to read. Joe was pretty slow in the reading element. He would be studying and studying it, and while he was engrossed in this study, someone will light the paper on fire. There was a lot of that type of pranks that filled a lot of idle time. I remember I had a cousin in Ingonish, North Bay, who was a park ranger when they opened the park down there, and he moved into the house right next to the hospital at Niels Harbor. And his mother-in-law was staying with them at one point. And he kept her downstairs this evening, giving her cup after cup of tea, which she took on. And finally she tottered up the stairs to bed. And after about 2 minutes, there was some wild shrieking from upstairs. The outside plumbing, of course. The wife ran up the stairs and back down. She said, "I don't know what Mom's screaming about." He said, "I was wondering if it was the bottle of Alka-Seltzer I put in the chamber closet." We had a character who was a chief of police, which some of you will remember, Chief Louis Clark. And I had my own run-in with him. Mancini's had a soft drink plant at the corner of Brook and Queen Streets. And though Mancini was known to distribute more than soft drinks, he was a consul for St. Pierre, home of many libations begging to be shipped elsewhere. Anyway, there was a group of us small boys went around the back where the shed was that housed the machinery to make the soft drinks. And we climbed up to a level. And there was windows behind it where one of the fellows got it open and went inside. I was bashful, so I kept to myself, as the old song says. I squatted on the roof, where I was discovered shortly by Officer Carter and shooed home. The next morning, Chief Clark called upon our house, and my father answered the door, invited him in, and the story was related about the break-in. I was not punished by the police. But my sister Jean, my oldest sister, had me go to the stairway going upstairs and get below the banister and look out through the rings because she wanted to see what I looked like in prison. Oftentimes we'd go up to Kelly's Peaks and watch the Catalinas landing and being towed into the hangars. And it was a great way to pass the time on a summer's day. They would go out 100 miles or so looking for submarines, and they could see them because they were big and slow, but they could spot subs. And they flew over the boom defense, which was the net, which was across the harbor, just below Indian Beach here. And it was a steel mesh net with 2 old minesweepers guarding the entrance. And the password changed every day. It was done with flags. And this was for the convoys to rally in here and vote again. And finally, also to open them up for the ore ships coming from Belle Isle, Newfoundland. The ladies of North Sydney bore the brunt of being on call by providing social service to the soldiers, sailors, and the airmen who were stationed here. Few participated in the rich vineyards of erotica, which served as dance partners for those lucky men, especially officers, who had learned to dance prior to joining up. And there was several places that there was an officer's mess at the air base, and some of the halls around were used as entertainment centers for the visiting people in the forces. It was a hard time for kids that, who were trying to understand things. And Remembrance Days were always very big, and I was asked some years ago by CBC to do a national radio program for Remembrance Day. And I will read to you what I wrote at that time and deliver. Whenever I hear the word war, to me it means just one more, the Second World War. I was not one who fought on far-flung battle lines or who went over there. I was too young. But I can vividly recall how tall I stood on the Queen Street curbside in North Sydney as the Cape Breton Highlanders piped past to Highland Laddie. I have other memories as well, such as arranging my prayers to reflect the times. For instance, I had included in my Now I Lay Me Down to Sleeps the names not only of King George and Queen Mary, but the two little princesses, Elizabeth and Margaret, Mackenzie King, Bill Dickey, the catcher for the New York Yankees, and Wendell Willkie, who was a presidential candidate in 1940, and he was included because an uncle who was a hardline Pennsylvania Republican paid me 25 American cents, and he would not overlook even the remotest possibility to promote his candidate. Mr. Willkie's name was subsequently deleted. He was soundly defeated by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But my finest hour in World War II came in the spring of 1942. I was in grade 3 at the time, fairly good in English and history, fairly bad in arithmetic and science, which put me in seat 4, aisle 3, not really among the top achievers. However, I did make it to the front row, and all not because of academic excellence. I did what was expected of every 100% Canadian boy of that day. I spurned jawbreakers and hard hats, those big candies, to purchase war savings stamps. We kept old toothpaste tubes to send in for shell casings, and pulled the blinds down so the ARP wouldn't put us on their blackout list. I even had my own little victory garden. But with all of this, I had not made seat 1, aisle 3. Grade 3. Actually, I got there by being able to adapt. It happened this way. The school supervisor told the principal, and the principal told the classroom teacher, and the classroom teacher told us. We were to knit little squares when she would sew together into a blanket to be sent overseas. Smashed were my dreams of flying for Lanky, or standing steely-eyed on the bridge of a convoy duty corvette, or marching Tommy gun in hand with the British Expeditionary Force through Italy. I put aside these childish dreams for the more practical world of knitting. I was keen. By night I practiced, and within a week I was promoted to seat 1, aisle 3, grade 3. Arithmetic tables and Pauline Johnson's poetry gave way to the clicking of needles. I basked in the glory that only great performance merited. Head of my aisle and a part-time instructor. But it all lasted only 3 weeks total. There was a logistical breakdown which no one had anticipated. There were approximately 40 of us in grade 3, and we churned out 40 little squares each day. which made for a fair amount of sewing on the part of the teacher. The poor lady went cross-eyed with fatigue, and we had to lay our needles down. God knows where they ended up, but I often wonder at times if anyone over there ever got hold of blankets with little purple squares, which were my personal part of the war effort. School recess was something that is not practiced as much now, but it was a 15-minute break in the morning in classes. And that's where you participated in pitching alleys, or tiddly, or red rover, snatch the cat, which were rough games at times. Older kids wanted marbles because they had bigger hands and dominated the latter two games. Rough, yes, almost as bad as the candy scrambles at Sunday school picnics. A byproduct of recess were those seminars conducted by bigger boys who taught younger boys how to swear. I graduated. The classes were big, colds were rampant, but there were a few happy times. We liked to sing and did so with the teacher beating time with a wood pointer on the blackboard. We had no piano, and even the rhythm band disappeared, sent for the war effort, we were told. So we bought war savings stamps, and of course, there was no allowances, but parents helped at times, and we also collected beer bottles and sold them at Jerry Fried's. At 10, I went to work delivering groceries at Jackson's, which is Carmichael's grocery store. There was danger in this vocation, especially when one's arms were engaged in carrying a box of groceries and one's naughty parts were wide open to surly dog attacks. There was some relief occasionally, such as when a large lady standing at a kitchen counter supervising my unpacking her order, we saved the boxes then, she was wrapped in a pink negligee. This was before my teen hormones kicked in, and I was struck with the resemblance of her to a monstrous cone of cotton candy. In school, classes were there for older boys, and a few left primary school to join up, which was rather a strange matter at that time. They were held in awe. It was said that some of the move back of them couldn't pass urine tests, though we didn't say urine. We used recess talk. But some of us learned the basics of English, and we got to know our parse from our elbows. Or were taught the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, although some of us graduated to junior high without knowing our R's from a hole in the ground.